Hello everyone. Today we will talk about pharmaceutical legislation, and the subject is Pharmaceutical Jurisprudence. Code is BP505T. So, introduction part. What do you mean by legislation? Legislation is all about the rules and regulations set up by any government in any country. Okay. Now in we know that कि जितने भी कानून बनते हैं वो उसकी एक रिक्वायरमेंट होती है to fulfill those requirements so that everything should be conducted as per the requirement. In pharmacy also we have pharmaceutical legislation. Now this pharmaceutical legislation means it is the act and rules and regulation given by Government of India for the smooth conduction of pharmacy related work throughout the country. Okay, so we'll start with the introduction. You can see here during 1920 to 1930 there was a number of reports of harmful substituents and adulterants being marketed in place of genuine drugs, and toxic effects of such drugs were published in Indian press from time to time. Okay, according to the reports of Indian Medical Gazette, during this period there was absolutely no control over the manufacturing, sale and distribution of drugs in India. Okay, several deaths were also reported due to spurious drugs. So in 1920-1930 में क्या हुआ था कि बहुत सारे हार्मफुल सब्स्टिट्यूएंट्स वेयर यूज्ड, जेन्युइन ड्रग्स के जगह पे एडल्ट्रेटेड प्रोडक्ट्स वाज यूज्ड, और उसके वजह से क्या हो गया था कि बहुत सारे डेथ्स को रिपोर्ट किया गया था. और इंडियन मेडिकल गैजेट ने उस टाइम पर रिपोर्ट जनरेट किया था और उसने बताया था कि देयर इज नो कंट्रोल ओवर द मैन्युफैक्चरिंग, सेल्स एंड डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ ड्रग्स इन इंडिया. So there are a few examples. For example, in the place of eye drops, croton oil was used. Okay, and other adulterant was chalk powder. Chalk powder was frequently used for adulteration of the drug formulation. There were toxicity reports due to the overdose of mercury compound. So these were the common mistakes done in the past. Okay, so the British government, okay, by that time they forced to initiate the action of drug legislation. उस टाइम पर ब्रिटिश इंडिया था, तो उस टाइम पर यह बनाया गया था कि ब्रिटिश गवर्नमेंट ने इनिशिएट किया था, लेजिस्लेशन बनाया था, एक कानून बनाया था. ओके, ऑन 11th August 1930 ड्रग इंक्वायरी कमेटी, ओके, DEC की कंस्टिट्यूशन हुई थी. DEC was constituted under the chairmanship of R.L. Chopra. Okay, and this was the beginning of the development, signally beginning of new era of drug legislation. So drug legislation जो इंडिया में शुरू हुआ था, we can say that was in during the British government time, and in 1930 under the chairmanship of Colonel R.L. Chopra. So some of the important milestones during the drug legislation we can see here. So we'll divide this topic into two parts. One is the pre-independent era and one will be the post-independent era. So we'll quickly see what are the events related to drug legislation which occurred before independence and what development took place after the independence. Okay, so we'll see the pre-independent era. During the pre-independent era, as we know that 11/8/1930 Drug Inquiry Committee headed by Dr. Chopra, R.L. Chopra was constituted. This we discussed in the last slide also. In 1931, report was submitted by DEC to the central government. Okay, in 1932 again a 2-year degree course in pharmaceutical chemistry for BSc was introduced. Okay, so in 1932 there was a need for a 2-year degree course in pharmaceutical chemistry for BSc student. Okay, and this was the beginning of the pharmacy education, and the university which has started this work was Banaras Hindu University, and who under the leadership of Professor Mahadev Lal Shroff. Okay, and this professor is also known as the father of pharmacy education in the country. Okay. Further, moving on 1933, the Indian Medical Council Act was enacted. Okay, so Medical Council Act भी इस time पे बना था. In 1935, United Provinces Pharmaceutical Association (UPAA) was established at Banaras, the BHU, and the person behind was Professor Mahadev Lal Shroff. Okay. Further development before independence was in 1937, import of drug bill was introduced in the parliament during British India, and the law was later on withdrawn due to some criticism. Okay. In 1937, the Biological Standardization Laboratories (BSL) was established at Calcutta. The function of this to check the biological samples for its standardization. In 1939, United Provinces Pharmaceutical Association (UPAA) was renamed as Indian Pharmaceutical Association (IPA). Okay, and in 1940, the drugs bill introduced in the parliament, and Drug Act later amended to Drug and Cosmetic Act. So this is the time where Drug and Cosmetic Act was introduced in 1940. In 1940 itself, Biological Standardization Laboratory was named as Central Drug Laboratories under DCA, Drug and Cosmetic Act. In 1941, first Drug Technical Advisory Board (DTBA) was constituted. Later on in the same year 1941, first All India Pharmaceutical Conference was held at BHU Varanasi under the presidentship of Professor Shroff. In 1943, Health Survey and Development Committee constituted under the chairmanship of Sir Justice Joseph Bohr. Okay. In 1944, first IP committee was constituted. In 1945, Pharmacy Bill introduced in the Parliament. This is the time at the first time the Pharmacy Bill was introduced in the Parliament. Okay. In 1945, Justice Joseph Bohr submitted a report. Okay. And in 1945 itself, rules for Drug and Cosmetic Acts was framed. Okay. So Drug Act was framed. 1940 the Act was made. In 1945 the Act was framed. Okay. In 1946, Indian Pharmaceutical Codex (IPC) was also introduced at that time. Okay. So these were the development event which took place before the independence. In 1947, India got independence, but even after that, the continuation of law has progressed, and in 1947 you can see here the Indian Nursing Council Act was enacted. In 1947, Indian Nursing Council Act was enacted. In 1948, the Pharmacy Act 1948 was enacted. Okay. In 1948 itself, the Dentist Act 1948 was enacted. So in 1947 to 1948, three laws, nursing, pharmacy and dentist related act were introduced. Okay. In 1949, especially on 9/11/1949, First Pharmacy Council of India PCI was constituted under Pharmacy Act. Okay, the Pharmacy Act जो पहले बना था उसके अंदर PCI Pharmacy Council of India जो था वो फर्स्ट टाइम 1949 में बना था. Okay, and in 1949 doctors KCKE Raja was nominated as the central government, nominated by the central government as the first president of Pharmacy Council of India. Okay, so Dr. KCKE Raja was the first person who was framed as president of Pharmacy Council of India. In 1951, the Industries Act was enacted. Okay, so this Industries Act, which are basically related to the pharmaceutical industries, okay, though dealing with the pharmaceutical drugs, for those, for them also act named as Industrial Act was enacted in 1951. Okay, moving later on, moving further, on 11/7/1953, first education regulation ER was approved by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. Okay, so first education regulation ER, education means what type of education is going to be framed or is going to be applicable throughout the India, was given in 1953. Okay, and this include also pharmacy courses. In 1954, the Drugs and Magic Remedies Act was enacted. Drug and Magic Remedies Act was enacted. Okay, drugs and magic remedies, they are also, other name is objectionable advertisements. Okay, so they were also introduced. बहुत सारी मान्यताएं थी पहले कि बहुत सारे मैजिक करके लोगों को ठीक किया जाता था, बिकॉज ऑफ अवेयरनेस नहीं थी, है ना, तो वो सारी चीज़ों के लिए भी एक एक्ट बनाया गया और उस एक्ट का नाम था द ड्रग्स एंड मैजिक रेमेडीज एक्ट. In 1954, the Pharmaceutical Inquiry Committee recommended appointment of graduates in pharmacy as chief pharmacist for all large hospitals. So it was realized in 1954 that to run a pharmacy in any large hospitals, a minimum graduates in pharmacy is required to work as a chief pharmacist. Okay, to serve to give drug services in large hospitals. This was realized long back in 1954. In 1954 itself, the first B Pharmacy course was approved by Pharmacy Council of India at Birla College, Pilani. Okay, so B Pharmacy course has started long back in 1954, and it was started by BIT Pilani. Okay, later on, 1 year later in 1955, the first diploma in pharmacy course was approved by PCI at Government Medical College, Amritsar. Okay, so soon after 1 year of B Pharm introduction, in 1955, diploma course was also introduced in Government College of Pharmacy, Amritsar. Okay, in 1955, first Indian Pharmacopoeia was published. In 1955 itself, the Medicinal and Toilet Preparation Excise Duty Act was introduced. In 1956, Essential Commodities Act was enacted. In 1956 itself, the University Grant Commission Act was enacted. Okay, UGC Grant Commission was enacted. In 1957, dangerous drugs. Okay, dangerous drugs rules was framed. Dangerous drugs were those drugs which are habit forming drugs or life taking drugs. Okay, banned drugs, their import, their exports and their shipment, both were included in this act. In 1960, Prevention of the Cruelty to Animal Act was passed. In 1960, between 1960 to 70, Indian Drugs and Pharmaceutical Limited (IDPL) established at 5 places in the country. Okay, in 1962, can see here, the Central Manufactured Drugs Rules was framed. In 1962, beginning of National Pharmacy Week. National Pharmacy Week जो celebration होती है, okay, was planned in 1962, and it was decided to be celebrated on third week of November every year. Third week of November every year after 1962 it has been celebrated. Okay. Moving further, in 1963, Pharma Times publication of Indian Pharmaceutical Association as professional monthly publication was introduced. Okay. So Pharma Times publication, this is the famous Pharma magazine, or we can say newspaper, Pharma Times, and it was started at the first time in 1963. In 1963 itself, the Indian Hospital Pharmacist Association, that is IHPA, Indian Hospital Pharmacist Association, was launched at BIT Pilani, Rajasthan. Okay. So most of our pharmacists were working in the hospitals. There were no association regarding to it. So in 1963 it was realized that an association is required for those pharmacists who is working in the hospital, and in 1963 the Indian Hospital Pharmacists Association was launched. Okay. In 1964 the Indian Journal of Hospital Pharmacy is started by Professor B.D. Miglani for IHPA. Okay. Soon after the formation of IHPA, they have also planned to publish a journal, and the journal is Indian Journal of Hospital Pharmacy. Okay. In 1966, second Indian Pharmacopoeia was published. In 1968, Insecticides Act was enacted. In 1970, first DPCO, Drug Price Control Order, okay, was introduced, and later on it was published, or we can say it was framed in it was published in 1979 with a amendment in 1979, 1987 and 1995 also. Okay. In 1970, Indian Patents Act was enacted. Okay. Patents are those things which this will be covered later on in this unit itself, patents. Okay. The act was introduced in 1970. In 1971, Medicinal Termination of Pregnancy Act was enacted. Moving further, in 1972, Education Regulation of PCI was introduced. Okay. So PCI has drafted what are the education policies to be framed so that students should be educated effectively in terms of gaining pharmacy information or pharmacy knowledge. In 1972, which was notified on 6/1/1973, in 1973, Homeopathic Central Council Act was enacted. Okay, Homeopathy Central Council Act was enacted in 1972, but it was notified in 1973. In 1974, Committee of MPS with Jai Suklal Hathi as chairman for the drugs and pharmaceutical was constituted. Okay, in 1974, Hathi Committee was constituted, and in 1975, Hathi Committee report submitted. The committee recommended that chief pharmacist with at least a graduate in pharmacy degree should be appointed for maintaining quality of drugs supplied to patients. Okay, so Hathi Committee was formed with an objective to know the role of pharmacist actually. So they, after doing the research, they submitted the report. There is a need of chief pharmacist which should be graduate in pharmacy, and he or she is only responsible for maintaining the quality of the drugs which is supplied to patients in hospitals. In 1975, All India Organization of Chemists and Druggists, AIOCD, was established with Mr. V.L. Thangaraja as president. V.L. Thangaraj as president. Okay. In 1976, the dentist regulation was framed, which is also known as Code of Ethics for Dental Practitioners, dentist. Okay. So this was also covered. In 1977, Indian Pharmaceutical Congress along with the Conference of Commonwealth Pharmaceutical Association was held under the presidentship of Dr. J.N. Banerjee at Mumbai. In 1978, drug policy was announced based on Hathi Committee report. In 1979, Indian Journal of Pharmacy was named as Indian Journal of Pharmaceutical Sciences, and it was a bi-monthly publication. In 1981, education regulation of PCI was notified on 11/7/1992. In 1985, third Indian Pharmacopoeia was published. In 1985, the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act was enacted. In 1986, Consumer Protection Act was enacted. Moving further, in 1991, education regulation of PCI notified in 1993, so they have revised the syllabus. And in 1994, modifications in drugs policy was done in 1994. In 1998, Golden Jubilee of Indian Pharmaceutical Congress, that is IPC, along with the Conference of Federation of Asian Pharmaceutical Association FAPA, was held at Mumbai under the presidentship of Professor C.K. Kokate. Okay. In 1999, Golden Jubilee Year of Pharmacy Council of India celebrated throughout the country. In 2001, the first pharmacist, Professor C.K. Kokate, was appointed as Vice Chancellor of any Indian university, and the name of the university was Kakatiya University in Andhra Pradesh. It is situated in Warangal. In 2002, pharmaceutical policy announced by Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers, Department of Chemicals. So pharmaceutical policy was announced by the Ministry of Chemicals in 2002. So next we will see the Drug Inquiry Committee. Regarding Drug Inquiry Committee in 1930. So as we know, this DEC was constituted in 1930 with R.L. Chopra as chairman, Shri C. Govindanath Nair as the secretary, and Dr. B. Mukherjee as assistant secretary. Okay. The other three members of the committee were, और भी लोग थे इसमें, J.F. Cos, Mr. H. Cooper and Maulvi Abdul Matin Chaudhary. They were the other members of this committee. The committee did splendid service to the cause of pharmacy profession in the country. So they have actually started, they are the person who has actually started thinking about pharmacy profession long back in 1930. Following were the reference of DEC. What they did is they said to inquire the drug and chemicals of impure quality or defective strength, particularly those recognized by British Pharmacopoeia, were imported, manufactured or sold in India, and controlling such imports or sale, and to make recommendations. To report how far recommendations have been made under above may extended to known and approved medicinal preparation, to ensure into legislation to restrict the profession of pharmacy to qualified person. The report of committee was published in 1931. The committee finally recommend what they recommend: central legislation is required to control the drug and pharmacy. Setting up of test laboratories is needed in all states to control the quality of production of drugs and pharmaceuticals, and a control laboratory to control the quality of imported drugs. Appointment of an advisory board is required to advise the government in making rules to carry out the object of the act. There was also setting of training courses, it was recommended by this committee in pharmacy, and prescribing minimum qualification for registration. Now, the registration of every patent and proprietary medicine of undisclosed formula manufactured in India, they also recommended this. The crude single drug used for the treatment must be controlled. The drug industry in India should be developed. Steps should be taken to compile Indian pharmacopoeia. Okay. After the publication of the report, the first department of pharmaceutics was started in BHU in 1938. Indian Pharmaceutical Association has its origin in 1935. It took a decade before the Drug Act 1940 was passed, and another decade to pass Pharmacy Act 1948. The Indian Journal of Pharmacy was started by M.L. Shroff in 1939. All India Pharmaceutical Congress Association was established in 1940. The Pharmaceutical Conference held its sessions at different places to publicize pharmacy as a whole. All these developments boosted the pharmaceutical profession and provide greater awareness about the drugs and drugs trade. Now, future trends in drug regulations. What are the future trends? The Drug and Cosmetic Act 1940 and Rules 1945 were amended many times to improve the quality of the product. Schedule E, I and L were deleted. Schedule G, Schedule H were revised. H1 is also added. Schedule Y, Schedule M were introduced under DNC Act 1988. There is an urgent need of amendment in Pharmacy Act 1948. This is also future trends. Moreover, more power should be given to Pharmacy Council of India to implement uniform regulations for degree and PG courses in pharmacy in country. Okay, so these are the requirements. So, reference you can see N.K. Jain, a textbook of forensic pharmacy, 7th edition, 2011, and textbook of forensic pharmacy by C.K. Kokate. So, with this, this is all about how the pharmaceutical regulations has started in India. So, pre-dependent, before independence and after independence, it has been covered. Okay. So, thank you for your time.